Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new to my channel, hello. My name is Caitlin Elliott, and I cover true crime cases on Tuesdays and Fridays, with my more vintage cases being posted on Fridays. So my last video, we actually talked about the solved case of Tanya Panette, a young woman from Canada who was murdered by her own boyfriend. I should say that she was kind of like a young teen because she was only 15 years old at the time. So in today's case, we're going to be talking about another vintage case, and this case is the now solved case of Candace Rogers. Candace Elaine Rogers, or Candy Rogers as she was known to her friends and family, was born on July 18th of 1949 in Spokane, Washington. She was the only child of Elaine and Carl Rogers Jr., and she was said to have been a very loving and kind little girl who had a lot of friends. In 1959, she was 9 years old, and she was a 4th grade student back at Holmes Elementary School in Spokane, Washington. Candy had a lot of hobbies that she really enjoyed doing over the years, but her favorite hobby of all of them was being a Campfire Girl. So, the Campfire Girls was created back in the early 1900s by a man named Dr. Gulick alongside of his wife named Charlotte. So both Charlotte and Dr. Gulick wanted to create a type of group that was catered to young women and, young girls, and oriented around what they could do outside. Candy was said to have been just extremely proud of herself for being able to be part of this group, and her parents were proud as well. In March of 1959, Candy decided she was going to sell some mints in order to help her troop. Back in 1959, no one really considered going from door to door as unsafe. They really, didn't have a lot of adults that would go out with the children and supervise them. They always believed that the children would be fine. So they would sell, these candies, these cookies, these mints, all by themselves without adult supervision. And this especially happened back in the Girl Scouts. So thankfully nowadays, the Girl Scouts, they always sit in front of like your local Walmarts. There's some people out at the PX here that sell Girl Scout cookies. There's a lot of people who sell them right outside of stores to help with protecting the safety. So children back in the 1950s would go from door to door in their local neighborhoods to try and sell items like I'd mentioned, and the young children would be completely unsupervised. On March 6th of 1959, Candy went to her elementary school that day. When she came home after school let out, she decided she was going to play with her beloved dog at the time. Because Candy was an only child, she really didn't have any siblings or really a lot of friends that she could play with that were close by, so she ended up spending a lot of time playing with her dog. At 4 p.m. that exact evening, Candy went out by herself with the intention of selling mints for her troop. And her mother allowed her to do so alone because, they had other things they had to do. And they really didn't think anything of this because the community seemed really safe. And back in the 1950s, it's considered the safe era, the perfect American lifestyle type of era. So she quickly hugged her parents at goodbye and waved as she started leaving the driveway with her little wagon filled up with the mints. So several hours started to go by, and her parents became extremely worried because Candy had not returned home from selling her mints. Elaine decided to call Candy's grandparents and alert other local neighbors about Candy's disappearance to see if anybody had seen the little girl. An hour after the search began, Candy's father named Carl, he arrived at the home to help with the search, as they were divorced, and this was kind of uncommon back in the 1940s and 50s was to be divorced. Not a lot of people were divorced back then. It was kind of shunned and frowned upon. And he ended up living still in Spokane, and he traveled to the house and helped out with the search. So an hour after all of this, the family ultimately called the authorities, and right off the bat, they knew that something was extremely wrong when they couldn't find Candy right away. Candy was not close by the home. They searched everywhere, and Candy wasn't exactly the kind of girl that would just go off and vanish with strangers, because she was a very well-behaved little girl, and she knew stranger danger. The search for Candy Rogers would soon become one of the largest searches of missing persons cases in the entire history of the United States and the state of Washington. Around 8 p.m. the night of her disappearance, an official search was conducted for Candy, and within only a few hours, hundreds of local police officers and volunteers began searching for the 9-year-old little girl. Eventually, over the next several days, there would be a 24-hour search done, 24-hour search party that was put up for Candy, so everyone was constantly searching for her that could. And there was even 2 local religious bishops from the Catholic churches that started to talk to anyone that they could about the disappearance of Candy. The local media begged anyone to come forward that could come forward with any type of information about Candy's disappearance. The police then began to question the residents of the area and ask if anyone had seen Candy that day, and a majority of the residents did see the little girl walking around door to door trying to sell her mints, like what she had been trying to do. The search continued to grow larger and larger and larger. And as this was going on, people were searching from aerial view and on horseback, and people were driving their cars just looking everywhere that they could to find her, which is crazy. And despite all of these people searching for her, nothing was ever found. And if this isn't bad enough that a 9-year-old little girl went missing while trying to sell mints for her little troop, there was a local Air Force base that was by Spokane, Washington, and they sent out some choppers to go and look for Candy as an aerial view search. This base was only said to be about 12 miles away from Spokane, so the Air Force base was relatively close by, so they could quickly, help out as much as they possibly could. The helicopter struggled to see exactly where they were going because, it is like March, so there is snow everywhere, and it was kind of hard for everyone to see, the clouds, frostiness. So eventually it crashed into a power line, and this ended up killing 3 of the 5 men on board. The 3 airmen that were killed on the helicopter were Airman First Class Marlos D. Ray, Sergeant William A. McDonald, and their leader, Lieutenant Kenneth G. Faltek. While everyone in Spokane, Washington was just trying to help with this investigation to find this poor little girl, they were now having to struggle with the fact that there was a helicopter crash that killed a whole bunch of service members as well. And these service members had just gone out of their way to go and volunteer and help in the search for Candy. So it just really devastated the whole community. During the final search for Candy Rogers, more than 1,200 people began aiding the local authorities with their search. This search alone quickly became one of the largest missing persons cases in the country, which is absolutely insane because not a lot of people, do tend to look for children or any type of missing people like that. Like 1,200 people, that is a lot of people. That's a whole population for some small towns, It's just crazy to me. Unfortunately, no one from the public came forward with any information, and the police were just hoping that someone could provide them with any type of information about the whereabouts of Candy. Over 700 tips eventually ended up being called into the Spokane, Washington Police Department, but unfortunately, none of these ended up leading them anywhere. There were 2 important clues, though, found as well during the search for Candy Rogers, and thankfully, it just wasn't a wild goose chase of them just trying to figure out, just going anywhere they could willy-nilly. So at 9 p.m. that evening, on the evening that Candy had vanished, 6 boxes of the mints that she had been selling were ultimately located by someone who was just walking around at night, going for a nightly walk. Maybe they're walking their dog, going out for a family walk, just mind their own business, beep, bop, boop, and they passed the box of mints. So obviously, this concerned them, and they ended up calling the authorities saying, hey, I heard that little girl went missing trying to sell mints. I found some mints, and the second clue was actually found the following day by the Air Force Base. So the Air Force Base actually found them. So there were 2 local airmen that were stationed at the Air Force Base, and they decided to just go for a little performance hike. A lot of people, try to stay in the best physique that they can in the military. Otherwise, you can get kicked out for being too overweight or too out of shape. So they just go out to do a little morning hike, mind their own business. And as they were walking around, they found a pair of young girls' shoes, and they were absolutely stunned because why would these shoes just be in the middle of the woods? These shoes were said to have been blue suede shoes and said to have belonged to a young girl. These shoes were said to have been discovered in the woods by a road called Old Trails Road. So the airmen, they take note of where they found these shoes, and they make their way back to the base to inform their leadership of what they had found in the woods. The 2 airmen, they were obviously concerned and curious to see if the shoes did in fact belong to that missing girl, Candace Rogers. The airmen, they traveled to the local police station after informing, their leadership, and they said, go to the police, let them know, and they did, and they reported the finding to them. The Spokane police, they traveled to the home of Candy's grandfather in order to verify whether or not the shoes found by the airmen did in fact belong to Candy. He did, in fact, though, confirm that these shoes did belong to her, and as soon as the shoes were positively identified as hers, the authorities, they started search in that exact area where the shoes had been found for any more pieces of evidence. On March 22nd of 1959, there was a huge search party that was set out in hopes of finding anything that could lead them to Candy. As they were searching, one highway patrolman, he was in the area, and he just spotted this random knee that was sticking out of a bush. He was like, why is there a knee in the bush? It confused him enough that he pulled over to the side of the road, and he decided he was going to go and check out why there was this leg sticking out from a bush. So as he goes closer to investigate, he starts pushing back all the leaves, and he is absolutely stunned and shocked beyond all belief to find the body of a little girl. 130 feet off of this road called Old Trails Road was where the body of 9-year-old little Candace Rogers was discovered. Candy had been abducted, brutally raped, and then strangled to death with her own crinoline, I believe is how you pronounce it. So if you don't know what a crinoline is, it's supposed to make the bottoms of your dresses stick out more. That was very popular back in the 1940s and 50s. So this was absolutely just devastating to the family because this was their only daughter, and I think it might have been the only granddaughter as well on that side of the family. So everyone was just tore up. So when Candy's body was officially discovered by the police and was announced that Candy's body had been found, the entire community of Spokane, Washington was just so upset and heartbroken because the little girl had just been going out trying to sell mints, and someone had snatched her and done something so terrible to her. And this crime really should never have happened because she should have just been able to go out and do her own thing. It just really upset everybody in the area. The community had a really bizarre mix of feelings. There was people who were outraged, and some were just crying and upset. And obviously, there was no arrest. There was never an arrest at the time because no one knew who could have done this. And the community was terrified for the safety of their own children. Families believed that the killer, who was still obviously not caught at this time, was still out there preying on more young children to lure in and kill like he did to Candy. I'm going to say he because if she was raped, it had to have been by a guy because only guys would give out semen. Back in 1959, there was absolutely no advanced technology back then, and DNA analysis was not a thing. So unfortunately, Candy's case went cold extremely, extremely quickly. Her case ended up remaining cold for 6.5 decades. That's right, over 6.5 decades. I mean, it's about as long as, actually, hold on. Yeah, it's a year more than the time it took for them to solve Little Miss Nobody. I mean, it was just years and years and years. So luckily, over the years, the authorities did in fact have several suspects, three main suspects that they believed could be behind Candy's murder. On her clothes, when she had been killed, it was said that there was smeared gum on her clothes. This smeared gum was said to have been grape flavored. And why am I saying this? Because it's important to know that there was a serial killer in the area who was recently caught, and this killer was said to have chewed grape gum. This serial killer was ultimately identified as a man named Hugh Bion Morse. Hugh was born on January 9th of 1930 in Kansas City, Missouri. It's said that his parents, they hated each other from the start. They didn't love each other. They didn't want to be together. And as soon as Hugh was born, his father used the birth of Hugh as an excuse to just split and, leave his girlfriend or his baby mama at the time. And it left the woman with Hugh, and he ended up leaving them for another woman. So he was like, no. Then he even lied to this new woman that he was with, saying that he wasn't a father. He was never previously in a relationship that could have given him a kid. So it's just all around tragic. So Hugh was raised ultimately by this very abusive grandmother who never wanted to even be a grandmother in the first place. So she absolutely hated Hugh from the start. She was said to have been extremely abusive and would lash out all of this aggressive and pent up anger onto Hugh when he was only 4 or 5 years old. Like 4 or 5 years old, and she's like beating him with wooden spoons, with bowls, pushing him down, like throwing him into things. It's just so devastating. His grandmother would also go on to tell him that nobody loved him, nobody wanted him, and he should never have been born. Which, oh my God. Because of all this abuse by his grandmother, Hugh ultimately grew up with a very strong and defiant hatred towards all women. He enlisted into the United States Marine Corps in 1948 after the ending of World War II, but he was ultimately discharged for having to do illegal and very shady activity. It's not said what the shady activity was, but I'm sure we can infer. So he also had attempted to molest an 8-year-old little girl back in 1955, which is disgusting to think about. He was then sent to a mental asylum for 2 years before being released to see if maybe this, the fact that he was trying to molest these little kids could be due to the fact that he was traumatized as a child by being abused so much. So after he was released, Hugh then decided he was going to just creep out at night, creep around all these houses, peeping Tom, and he would break into the homes of these young women before violently assaulting them. Yeah. He ended up moving to Spokane, Washington in 1959, and while he was living in Spokane, he assaulted and murdered a woman named Glory Bree. And then he ended up murdering another woman on September 26th of 1960 named Blanche Boggs. Hugh then attempted to actually strangle his own ex-wife, which, thank God, she actually survived. And she ended up, reporting this to the police, like, hey, my ex-husband, Hugh, blah, 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 said, like, he did this to me, but he had fled the scene before the authorities could arrive. Hugh then moved to the New England area, and he ended up killing 2 more women before he was ultimately arrested for his crimes. Hugh was caught and then sent to prison for 2 consecutive life sentences. The authorities, they believed that Hugh was the one that had killed Candy just because of the fact that it was upon his nature, he did, rape that young girl, he did strangle his victims. So even his own friends and family thought that Hugh was the one that did this, which is just wow. When it came to this case, at the time, Hugh was their main suspect. He was absolutely number one on the top of the list. He was questioned about the murder of Candy and ended up passing a polygraph test, which we all know, polygraph tests cannot exactly always be reliable. It's just interesting to have because they have a lot of, information out there. People can say they're lying about this. They could basically say that someone could or could not be a suspect. We don't really know. So it's just odd to me. So Hugh, he ended up passing away in the year of 2003 while he was still in jail for his crimes. His DNA was tested ultimately after his death to see if this DNA could possibly be in relation to what happened to Candy Rogers. But in fact, when the DNA came back to see if he was Candy's killer, it was shown that it was not a match. So when the public found out about Hugh being innocent, they were just so upset. They were just outraged because everyone at this point thought it was Hugh. And when they found out it wasn't, they're like, what? Like, mind blown, essentially. The second suspect was said to have been this man who was 50 years old, and his name was Alfred Graves. Alfred grew up in the local area, and he lived only a few blocks away from where Candy was murdered. And get this. On the exact same day that her body was found, Alfred committed suicide. Yeah, it just seems so sketchy. So this is just super weird and super suspicious based on the timing of everything. And, Alfred, it said that he had been formally accused of assaulting women and young girls like Candy. And the police even found pieces of rope and bobby pins in Alfred's car, which is a little weird. There was never enough evidence, though, to fully arrest Alfred with connection to the case. He was ultimately dismissed by the police as the suspect and was never charged in connection for the crime, and he ended up committing suicide, like I said. The final suspect that the authorities had at this time was a man named James Howard Barnett. James was said to have been about 49 years old at the time of Candy's murder, and he also ultimately committed suicide in the year of 1960 after being arrested for sexual crimes against children. Ew. Like, honestly, what kind of a disgusting human being does sexual crimes or has sexual tendencies towards children? That's just disgusting. It's disgusting. However, there was never enough evidence to prove that he was the culprit behind Candy's death, but this was honestly, super bizarre that he also committed suicide as well. It's just really weird. Even James Barnett's own widow at the time said that she felt so strongly that he was the one that did it to Candy. His own widow said that he was the one that possibly did this to Candy. It was just, wow. For over 6 long, grueling decades, the case of Candy Rogers laid cold and dormant without any real leads. All they had was the people that used to be suspects and were then ultimately ruled out, or they committed suicide and nothing showed up. So police were just so heartbroken and just very frustrated that nothing was coming from any of these. Before Candy was killed, parents really felt like it was safe enough to let their children play outside unsupervised because nothing bad ever really happened in the community prior to her murder. Children became extremely overprotected by their parents, and no one felt it was safe for their children to be left alone outside. If little Susie wanted to go outside and play, her older brother Tom had to be there, and Tom's oldest brother Jerry had to be there and watch all 3 of them as well, just to make sure that everything was okay. And then the parents would have to pop up and show up as well and watch. No one felt comfortable enough letting their children be outside by themselves, especially since, like I said, the killer had not been caught. Though throughout the years, as time went by, what seemed like with no leads whatsoever, it made everyone feel like this case would never truly be solved. No one believed that anything would come of this. Everyone thought this was just going to lay dormant, which, as we know now, it wouldn't. In 2021, after 62 long, grueling years, Candy's murder was finally solved. Early that year, the Spokane Police Department decided they were going to try genetic genealogy on this case. This method of technology was the same type of method that was used to solve the Golden State Killer case, which I have done a video on. I can link that down below if you guys would like to watch it. It's pretty interesting. It is over an hour long, I will say. It's a very long one. So, authorities were able to obtain a semen sample, which is so disgusting for me trying to say that, from Candy's body, and was sent over to another lab called Othram. The Othram facility made a profile for the killer and ultimately entered it into a genealogy database. Like, it's kind of like 23andMe and all this other stuff. So, it narrows it down to 3 men who were said to have been brothers. But in 2021, every brother, unfortunately, was deceased. But one had a daughter, and her name was Kathy. And this woman named Kathy was alive at the time and would be able to provide a DNA comparison. So, authorities, they got in contact with Kathy as quickly as possible and told her everything about the possibility that her own father could be involved in the murder of Candy Rogers that occurred back in 1959. When she found out about her father possibly being a murderer, she dropped everything that she was doing and she quickly rushed over to the police department in Spokane and decided to help them with their investigation as much as possible. Kathy even donated her own DNA to test against the killer's DNA without being questioned, by the way. She did this herself. And she just wanted to check and see if, she could do anything to help out. And when the test results came back, it stated that Kathy's DNA was over 2.9 million times more likely to be related to the killer's DNA. Like, wow. The Spokane authorities requested permission to exhume her father's remains to test and see if his DNA could possibly be a match to the DNA that was found in Candy's body. And, she granted this. She said, yeah, go ahead. She felt so bad that this little girl had been murdered, and she just wanted to do everything that she could to help. So the authorities performed a DNA test from what was found from the crime scene and compared it to the DNA of Kathy's father, and it was determined to be a perfect match. The killer of Candace Elaine Rogers was announced as a man named John Ray Hoff. John, he actually grew up in Spokane, Washington, and he had lived there his entire life, even after he murdered Candy. He ended up entering the United States Army and was stationed in or around Spokane at the time. It's possible that he went to the Air Force base that was, right there. Like, he could have been stationed by the Air Force base. There's a couple of Army bases in Washington, so he was stationed pretty close by. And he joined the Army when he was only 17 years old. John was said to have lived only a half a mile away from Candy's home and was said to have been 20 years old at the time of her murder. Well, 19 or 20. It's said that only 2 years after he had murdered Candy, John then eventually assaulted another young woman. After removing her clothes, he had tied her up and then attempted to strangle her to death. This was the exact same way that he had killed Candy. So it's possible that he might have been trying to become a serial killer, a serial rapist. Who knows? So luckily, thank God, this young woman, she survived being assaulted by this guy, John. And he was ultimately sentenced to 6 months in prison. Due to his now existing criminal record, John was dishonorably discharged from the United States Army. He would then go on to be employed as a door-to-door salesman, a lumber yard worker, and he even worked as a meat packaging planter in a meat factory. While working here, John ended up sustaining some pretty severe and hefty, like really bad, severe chemical burns, which actually disfigured part of his body, which I honestly cannot say that he didn't deserve that, because, karma's a bitch, comes at the worst times. So John then got married soon after this and would go on to start his own family by his mid to late 20s. Then, in the year of 1970, at the age of 31, John committed suicide by a gunshot to the temple. Candy's family was absolutely just overjoyed that it was announced that her case was finally solved. They were just thrilled beyond belief, because they felt like, this case might never ever be solved. So, though her parents were not alive back in 2021, they were deceased, she still had several cousins who are still alive and were living in Spokane at the time of the DNA match with her killer. So, Candy's mother ended up passing away from natural causes back in 2006, but her father ended up committing suicide at the age of 44. Oh my god. I don't think I've ever talked about this much suicide or anything like that on my channel ever. Kathy, John Ray Hoff's daughter, is left feeling just terribly guilty and just horribly pained about what her own father had done to an innocent little girl who was just trying to raise money for her troop. She stated that she wanted to just pray for their lives, just every life that her father had affected due to his cruel decision to take the life of an innocent child. And this murder was done for seemingly no reason at all. It just seemed like he just saw this girl, wanted to, rape her, and then just ended up strangling her and killing her. No one understood why he did this, and unfortunately we will never know, because he committed suicide before he was even ever caught. So, she was left affected by the fact that she had no knowledge that her own father, a man that she had loved and cherished and who had helped raise her as a young child, was a brutal killer of a child. It just blows my mind. There was said to have been no real link between John Hoff and Candy Rogers. This was said that there was only one real so there was actually one link that was done between John Ray Hoff and Candy, and this link was the only. It's weird how he was even able to remember her or know her or anything like that. It said that John had a younger sister, and she was 10 years old in the year of 1959, and this sister was also a Campfire Girl. The little sister was said to have been really good friends with Candy and was considered her big sister in the program. The lead detective on Candy's case wanted to meet up with the sister, and the two of them actually discussed this whole thing. He asked if Candy had ever met John, and the sister shook her head because she had no recollection of Candy and John ever meeting, which it's possible he may have even stalked her. I mean, who knows? It's just so sad. So she remembered, just being a 10-year-old little girl, finding out that her friend Candy had been brutally murdered, and she went and she cried her heart out to her big brother, who she didn't even know at the time was the one behind her friend's murder. It blows my mind and breaks my heart all at the same time. It's crazy to me. Kathy had originally believed that her father had actually killed himself because he was depressed, and he had suffered with depression for years. But now, after him being connected to the case and being said as the murderer, she's now not really sure that that's the reason why he killed himself. It's possible that John Hoff may have possibly had killed himself because he felt so guilty about what he did to Candy that he couldn't really go on with his life. Of course, this is all just my theory, it's my speculation. I have no idea if that's why he killed himself. You know, the circumstances surrounding the whole suicide thing, it seems like it's possible he may have been haunted by what he did to her back in, 1959, and he ended up, feeling so guilty he had to kill himself back in 1962, and he was said to have killed himself by gunshot as well. So it just, I'm sorry, I gotta take some deep breaths. Like, this whole thing is just blowing my mind. I got a headache now. So, of course, John cannot tell us now himself, why he did this, because he committed suicide back in 1970. So I want to know so badly, like, why did he do this to Candy? Did he have a sexual attraction towards her? Did he just, assault her and then she threatened to tell her parents and then he just strangled her to shut her up? Like, why did he do that to her? It just, it blows my mind. And how did he know that she was going door to door where she was at, and was able to, maybe possibly lure her away because she felt like she could trust him because he was the older brother of her friend? I mean, I don't really know. It's just, I don't, like, how? Like, what happened to Candy between the time that she was selling her mints to the time that she had been murdered? I want to know, like, what happened. Did she see him? He strangled her right then and there and killed her and then dumped her body over there? Like, maybe he lured her inside his house. Like, he's like, oh, my sister, I can go get my sister, blah, 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 and then ended up killing her and raping her. I don't know. I just want to know why he did what he did. I'm sure we all want to know why he did what he did, but, like, man. So, in today's time, if Candy Rogers was, in fact, still alive, she would be 72, going on 73 years of age, and possibly have been married, have her own kids, have possible grandkids at this point, because her kids probably might have been, like, 40 or 50. And she had that all taken away from her by the brother of a girl that she loved, that she was best friends with, and she probably trusted this guy, and he did this to her. Like, disgusting. As always, I would love to know what you guys think about this case. Do you guys think that he killed her, because she refused sexual acts and he had to rape her? Do you guys feel like he killed her to keep her mouth shut so she wouldn't, like, tell on him? Why do you think this happened? What do you think happened between her selling those mints to him doing what he did? I just have so many questions. I want to know what you guys think about this case down below in the comments section. And I'm so sorry. I know this is a really, really heavy case, guys. It was... Not a lot of cases affect me, but God, this one had me tossing and turning last night. I was crying. I just didn't understand why anyone would do this to a small child, how anyone could do this to the friend of your own sister. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So, this case was truly one of the darkest and saddest and heaviest cases I have ever researched in my life. It was awful. Awful, awful. So, don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so that you never miss a video. And don't forget to comment down below if you guys want me to cover any other specific cases. I also will take case requests. I'm trying to set up an email one of these days so you can just email me case requests through there. But, gotta take some deep breaths from this one. Jeez. So, again, I just want to know what you guys think about that one. And make sure you check out my True Crime Tuesdays series that I post every single Tuesday. And I also upload my Crimes Through the Time series every single Friday. Don't miss out on any of those videos. Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, put it on all so that you don't miss any of them. And I will see you guys in my next video. Also, what do you think about them being able to solve her murder after 62 years? Like, wow. Anyways, see you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.